Alysa Taylor joins the podcast today. Alysa Taylor is a corporate vice president for Microsoft's Industry Applications and Data Marketing team, leading three teams at Microsoft, directly empowering global organizations and partners, the Business Applications Product Marketing Organization, the Data and Artificial Intelligence Product Marketing Organization, and the Industry Marketing Organization. But in addition to that, Alysa is a people impact leader known for her authenticity, her self-care principles, and also embracing diversity and inclusion in the workplace. I've had the opportunity to listen to multiple of Alysa's talks around her personal philosophy and her leadership journey, which is one of the reasons I've asked her to come on today, to spend some time with me to talk to me a little bit about her leadership journey, talk to us about some of the lessons that she's learned along the way, and also the pieces of advice that she has to share for up-and-coming leaders. So without further ado, Alysa, thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Of course, leadership podcast, I always love to highlight key components of leadership for the audience on things that they can learn from and walk away with, to hone in on their craft. But of course, leadership, more often than not, always has this entire backstory and journey behind it, just in terms of, in our professional worlds, in our technology worlds, just in terms of how it all started and how we got to some of the roles that we've been in. You've had a tremendous journey. You've been at Microsoft for such a long time. Mm-hmm. In my introduction there as well, I talked a little bit about the global responsibility that you have for multiple different business units, large amounts of people, customers, partners. I'm very curious about how it all started. Talk to me a little bit about the first job prior to you coming to Microsoft and how it all transitioned into the role that you're in today.
Happy to do that. I have what I would call probably a unconventional background with some twists and turns along the way. But I started my career, believe it or not, in graphic design. So I left college. I had a journalism degree, a degree in architecture, and a degree in business. And out of those three, that combo, I decided I really wanted to do design. And so I had interned at an advertising agency, took a full-time job once I graduated. And it became clear that while I have such a passion for design, and it's something, has kind of stayed with me through the years, my ability to get what is in my head into a CAD drawing was never that successful. And so the agency that I worked for, which I just adore, and they were so supportive, sort of said, hey, you might be a touch better on the account side than you are on the creative side. And so I moved over to be an account manager, did that for a number of years, loved it. I worked for B2B healthcare, which was a set of clients that we worked with in that division. And then went on from that to management consulting and kind of kept that vein of healthcare. So moved to the Pacific Northwest and worked for a consulting firm here and managed some of the largest engagements we had with clients here in the Pacific Northwest. And after about 10 years, of being on the services side, what I realized and what I craved was that I wanted to be able to see things through. So both in the ad agency world and in management consulting, you take it only so far and then you move on to the next project. And I wanted to know what worked and what actually didn't work and be able to learn from that. And so I made the decision to come to Microsoft, and it was through a network of friends, and I joined as the global communications manager for something called the Microsoft Java Virtual Machine transition, which at the time, which was 17 years ago, which is crazy, was a piece of embedded software that we licensed from Sun Microsystems. And this was right in the sort of, the quote unquote holy wars of Java versus .NET. We had just launched .NET. We were making a big bet as a company on managed code. And it was the Java versus .NET battle. And so we couldn't possibly license this technology, which was a Java-based set of technology. And so my job was to run the global communications as we transitioned all of these applications off of that embedded software. And about 2 months in, so I've made this massive career move. I've come over onto the client side. And about 2 months in, we realized that transitioning off meant breaking every web application on the planet. And there was no, being able to transition it would cost trillions of dollars and customer pain. And right. So we decided to settle with Sun Microsystems. So we basically paid a settlement to Sun Microsystems to make the problem go away. And there was this giant V team working it. And they all disbanded and high-fived and off they went. And I was one of the very few that was a full-time dedicated person on this. And so I'll never forget, it was, if your viewers have seen, there's a movie called Office Space, and there's a gentleman that's sort of left in the basement with his stapler. Like, that was me. I was sort of like left with my stapler, like, what do I do? So I met with HR, and they said, well, you have a certain number of months to find a new job. And I was like, oh, okay. And so a gentleman that I worked with, who was leading this big project, he worked in the developer tools division, and he said, hey, I have a job running our channel, doing channel marketing for developer tools. And I was like, great. I don't know what a developer tool is. I don't know what a channel is, but let's give it a go. And so I interviewed. To this day, it's still a running joke of I have no idea how I got hired, but I did. And I don't think I talked for the first month. I'd go into these meetings and I was like, people are speaking, Greek. I had no idea what anyone was saying. And, I finally figured it out, and I came to really love the space. There's such art in development. So the art and science of, working with developers was just incredible. And like I said, it was a very dynamic space we were just launching .NET, and Visual Studio was just sort of taking off as a part of the Microsoft product portfolio. And so I ended up staying in our developer division, which started being called DP, and then moved to, it was actually NPETs when I started, and then it was DP, and then it became developer experiences. But I was in that division for 8 years. And I did everything under the sun. I started our very first ISV team. I ended up actually running the product marketing team for Visual Studio. I did MSDN and TechNet audience marketing, so all of our developer and IT pro marketing. And then my last role was actually running the M&O division for the US for DX at the time, which was just phenomenal. It was like an HQ function. So I did that for a number of years. And at the time, Judson Althoff was running the US sub, and asked if I would move over to be the business group lead for cloud and enterprise. And it was right when we were making a shift to Azure. And so I did that after much deliberation. I said, okay, and came over to take that job. And it was so fun because the problem that we had in hand was to mainstream Azure. And at the time, we were an Office and Windows company, and we sold on sockets. And I remember talking to people in the US about, platform sales and Azure, and they're like, that's a developer thing, like, go away. It was our target that year was $138 million. I'll never forget this. We had never made budget ever. It was like constantly red. And as in a subsidiary, this, like red on a scorecard is a very bad thing. So it was like this persistent red. And so we would do these pizza nights with Judson. They were strategy sessions, and there would be a bunch of us that would get in a room, and we'd drink beer and eat pizza and try and figure out how to shift the US subsidiary from socket selling to platform selling. And it was just this incredible 2 years. And we took it from 138 million to 2 billion in revenue. So the trajectory was just insane, and really sort of changed how we thought about, high potential accounts, and we thought about, projects, and we thought about the ISV ecosystem in a completely new way. And so it was phenomenal. And I was 2.5 years in, and Takeshi called and said, hey, I want you to do what you did with Azure for Dynamics. It was the Dynamics was effectively a wholly owned subsidiary. So there was an engineering lead that ran everything from sales and marketing and engineering and service. And Satya used to run Dynamics. And so his vision was to have a Microsoft cloud, you had to have the business application layer. And so they had taken the decision to break apart this sort of, unit and quote unquote mainstream it. So put sales and sales, put marketing and marketing, obviously engineering and engineering, and all of the functional alignment. And so I came over 4.5 years ago to run, and it was one of these things I'll never forget. Chris Webber was my mentor, and I told him, and I said, I'm going to go run business applications, and I'm really excited about it. And he was like, why would you do that? And I was like, oh, well, I think it's, it was a very funny dialogue. And, but it was a huge challenge. And it's just, so we, kind of came in, and there was none of the sort of marketing foundational pieces. We didn't have partner programs. We didn't have incentives for our partners. We didn't have sales plays. We didn't have basic sort of marketing demand generation lined up. We had all these crazy SKUs that weren't very customer centric. And so, we started on this journey of, accelerating dynamics, and it's phenomenal. Like, if you see the results that we posted last quarter, we are growing almost 50%, and, we're a multi-billion-dollar business now, which well, and it's incredible space. And so that's, sort of my journey on business applications. And then about a year and a half in, we decided to really consolidate industry. Similar kind of thing, take it out of kind of all of the different pieces around the company and, make a global industry sales team under Deb Cupp at the time, put marketing under, product marketing under me. And so we sort of said, all right, now we're going to make industry real. And we created the industry clouds, which was just, has been a phenomenal adventure and learning, and I think just great reception from the marketplace. And then about 3 months ago, we thought about the stack and sort of said, if all of what we're doing starts from data, and the world sort of now ingests data and apps are in service of the data, and we go to market by industry, we should have these functions together. And so we put data and AI came into the portfolio, and so now we are industry apps and data, and that's where we are today.
That's incredible, Alysa. So what an incredible journey. Thank you so much for sharing that. A key thing that I take away there, just in terms of your personality and some of the attributes that you display along that journey, is your ability to take on all these challenges, and also put yourself in an uncomfortable position to take on new business roles, even though you don't really understand the full context of the role. Take it on, figure it out, and continue to plug forward. I got 2 questions for you, just purely based on that. Question number 1. Where does that come from? Like, what drives you towards taking on challenging positions or putting yourself in an uncomfortable position for you to continue to plug forward and be successful with that? The second thing is, how much of those roles do you feel like you really drove forward for because of your passion for doing things and putting yourself in the uncomfortable zone, versus you having to do specific things to stand out in your career for you to be recognized to take on some of these senior roles?
Those are both great questions. I would say 2 things on the first, which is you come to know, as you grow in your career, attributes about yourself. Like, you sort of learn, I like creating things. Like, I'm a builder by nature. If you kind of harken back to the design side of it, like this, and my team knows this a lot. Like, I'm in a constant state of remodel. It drives my husband batty because I like building and creating things. So I think that's inherent in who I am, and it translates into work. But I also think that years ago, I worked for an Australian man, and I'll never forget this. He pulled me into my office, and we were sort of debating on my next role. And there were sort of 2 paths. I could take kind of more traditional path, working on the Windows server side, or sort of stay and create this ISV team. And he said, he said, you can edit me out if this is inappropriate, but this was his exact quote. He sort of said, if you don't show up to work every day, slightly scared shitless, then you're in the wrong role. And I thought, that's an interesting perspective. Like, if you're not nervous, right? Like, then you're not being challenged. And I've always held on to that of, like, you don't want to feel like you're going to fail. You don't want to feel like you're not prepared or have the capabilities or competency. But if there's sort of this nervousness of, like, oh, wow, like, this is going to stretch me. And if you're not feeling that stretch, then that's always something I've held true to, of, like, whatever I take on next, do I feel stretched? Do I feel like I'm going to learn new things? Do I feel slightly uncomfortable? And so that was a great, you started this with, like, what's the advice you get along the way? That's something that's always stuck with me. And he probably said it to me 12 years ago. And I still sort of remember that as, a moment in time where I'm like, that's a good way to think about, when you're comfortable, are you challenging and are you pushing yourself? So that's, on that place. And then to the point about, did I do it to sort of be recognized? I actually, I actually didn't. And I genuinely mean that. I do what I do because I love it. And I stayed at Microsoft because I feel like I've had a number of very different career experiences, and I've loved each one. And I keep sort of saying each year gets better. I'm like, oh, I love this year even more. I love this business, even more. And And so it was never with the intent, and everyone's motivated differently, but for me, it's always been around, do I feel challenged? Do I feel rewarded? And if I feel challenged and I feel rewarded, that is a good marriage for me. And I remember when I made corporate vice president, I was driving my kids to school. And it was 7 in the morning, and Takeshi, who I work for, called, and he said, "Hey, I need to talk to you." And I said, "Oh, okay." I was like, "I've got the boys in the car, but sure, what's up?" And he said, "Chris Capicella and I have decided to make you corporate vice president." And I was so shocked, I almost drove off the road. Like, it was not even on my radar. Like, I was loving what I was doing. I loved the business. I loved the things that we were doing. That it hadn't even occurred to me that it wasn't something I was striving for. It was just, and so, I think that's the perfect world of feeling challenged and feeling like you're, being rewarded in the right ways.
Maybe you would have done this already, but if you haven't, maybe let's just assume for a second, if you were to ask Chris, like, what drove him to make that call and make that announcement to you, what would he say?
I actually don't know. I'd have to ask him that, but I hope he would say, which is what we want of any of our executives at the company, that they embody the leadership principles. I work really hard, and I don't always do it, but I want to make sure that, I create clarity for the teams that I work with, that I generate energy, that people feel excited to come to work every day, and that we're driving business outcomes. And those are things that, I really hold true. And I would hope that he would say I was demonstrating those 3 things.
I have no doubt. I have no doubt. I love the piece of advice that you got there, by the way, in your career, just in terms of, being challenged and having the ability to put yourself in an uncomfortable position for you to grow as well, right? And not just be stagnant and not just be unchallenged to a point. On the topic of advice, I always believe that a lot of success more often than not, and especially in leadership as well, when you're making an impact, comes from your personal attributes, your personal characteristics, some of the lessons you've learned along the way, and some of the things you've actually figured out as well, just in terms of who you are as an individual, from your graphic designing days, taking on the M&O lead, taking on communications roles, and just being able to transition along the way, right? But I'm sure throughout that journey, in addition to the advice you talked about, there must be some key components of advice that you've received from some coaches and mentors and leaders that you worked for that have helped you tailor that journey and continue to promote you on the successful path that you've been in. If I were to ask you, in addition to the one you described already, of course, what is the one piece of advice that you've received from a leader? What would you say it was?
It actually wasn't. She was a leader. She wasn't at Microsoft. It was I had the privilege of working with a coach as part of one of the Microsoft programs, and it wasn't one piece of advice. It was a little bit of over time. But I would say the most impactful thing and what she taught me was to be authentic. Was to be an authentic leader. And as you can imagine, being a blonde woman in the 2000s working in the developer space, like, there weren't a lot of us. And I'd walk into these developer conferences, and the needle on the record would sort of stop of like, what is this foreign entity that just came in here? And I taught myself to code, and I like I said, I really sort of loved that space. But I always kind of felt like I was somewhat of an outsider in that world. And, as a result, I think human nature is to conform. And so, my girlfriends called it the bad sweater years. Like, I think I wore, jeans and baggy sweaters, and, just because I didn't want to stand out. And that's not who I am. I actually, again, I have a design background, and I love, I love things that are, that I feel good in as a person. And so this coach had sort of said, and I was a young manager. I was new to Microsoft. I was in a space. And so again, human nature is to sort of conform or to not, sort of necessarily be yourself. And I spent a lot of time working through with her of I believe very deeply that you are a better person at work if you are your authentic self versus pretending to be something else. And the story that I always tell is when I started in business applications, I walked in. Scott Guthrie has these things called pillar review. So he takes a business unit with all the engineering leads and all the product marketing leads, and it's a 2-hour deep dive on the product and the business. And this was back in the day of in-person events or in-person meetings. And I walked in and I was wearing these shoes that I think were just absolutely fabulous. They had pink sparkles on them. And I remember somebody looking down and being like, bold, like, did you just walk into an engineering review with pink sparkles on your feet? And I was like, I did, and it makes me happy. And so it's just those little things like that, it's to not try and hide who you are and to really embrace the gifts that you bring to bear. And I think being your authentic self and being an authentic leader is something I care very deeply about. And that's something I talk about quite often because I think, again, if I go back to it's human nature to try and conform or to act or talk or sound like, the masses around you. And not just if we believe in being inclusive, we can't have that. We need everybody to be who they are and not feel like they have to say certain things or talk a certain way or look a certain way.
That's so important, right? And that's one of the key attributes to getting the best performance out of people and building the best culture is just being able to embrace the diversity that we have of every individual that we collaborate and work with, but also create the platform for everybody to be authentic. And purely by the fact that you're saying that and you're saying that with such conviction as well, it just makes me feel so confident in the ability to be participating and working in a diverse culture. You've also done and are doing some really cool things in the organization just in terms of people impact. I've had the opportunity to listen to multiple of your talks, talking about some of the topics that you've just described there as well, just in terms of being your authentic self, talking a little bit about some of the advices that you've received along the way and redistributing that, sharing that with the organization as well, just to ensure that everybody else is receiving the value also. You ran a cool initiative with Dr. Michael Gervais. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. That was great. So when Judson Althoff was running the U.S. Sound, he brought in Michael Gervais to help coach the U.S. leadership to be a high-performing team. It's a corporate athlete was sort of the term of like how are you a high-performing team and how do you sort of become a corporate athlete? And Mike was phenomenal and just really sort of bringing kind of tools that we could all use in our toolkit. And I actually think what you're saying about, advice along the way and why I like doing these types of talks is you can take all of it, none of it, some of it, but I know like I can point to like what the gentleman told me about, sort of, feeling stretched in jobs. There's leaders that I have known along the way that have given me advice that have really stuck with me. And so I think there's, advice that you get that sticks with you. And then there's tools that you have to make sure that you are building that sort of leadership resiliency. And, leaders come in all different forms, right? It's not, this isn't because of the U.S. leadership or, Satya's leadership. We are all leaders. We're all working in very, impactful big businesses with very important roles, no matter what part of the company we're in. And so Mike Gervais was great. He there's a couple things that I would say I took away. He had lots of concepts, and I remember saying to Mike, I was like, I can't buy everything you're selling. You're selling a lot. It was one of these things where it was like get 8 hours of sleep, drink 64 ounces of water, exercise every day, meditate, once a day. And I was like, I can get on board with a couple of those, but like, no way is all of that happening. So messages you take, but the thing like being present was a big thing that he talked about, and being present is so important. Really being mindful of your who you're with, being present in that moment. It's something that I bring into work, but at home, and just the beauty of exercising and staying hydrated. I don't sleep 8 hours. It's not, I don't, but that, for others, like Amy Hood will talk about, like, she really, kind of for her, the sleep part was really impactful for her. And so, it's kind of knowing what do you need in your life that'll help you keep your energy up, stay optimistic, stay positive, and really, be engaged in the life around you. And that's what he taught. And there was a whole bunch of different things that that he talked about. But I think that big things were the mindfulness, and then just little changes in your life of recovery. This notion of recovery, like exercise is a form of recovery, meditation is a form of recovery, vacation is a form of recovery. Those things are really important. You can't run at 120% all the time. It's just the human body's not designed to do that. And it's not good for your body, it's not good for your mind. And so how do you rest and recover? And those are things that, that was 6 years ago, I think we did that work, and it's still something that, every day I practice some of that, some of those aspects of the building a high performing culture. And we bring it in, we do, in my leadership team meetings, we start with a moment of optimism. So it's what are you thankful for? So we pause, and we take 10 minutes and go around and talk about what we're thankful for. And it's amazing. It puts you in a very different mindset than starting with an agenda of all the things that we have to get done.
So this is incredible, right? You're saying some really impactful and powerful things that I'm actually taking down. And I have to ask you this question, right? Because you talked a lot in the prior answer about the being your authentic self, just being able to be comfortable with who you are and contribute successfully to the environment and the role that you're functioning in. And then you also said something there in the next answer when you talked about Dr. Michael Gervais. It was about the advices that you got along the way that you kept with you and you still remember. And you also talked a little bit about, starting off with a little bit of optimism around what you're thankful for. And so I feel, this is what I'm getting just from a leadership perspective, is that you have this impeccable balance of being confident and humble at the same time, just by talking about those two things. Am I right? And where does it come from?
I don't know if I do think like confidence matters. And, I know, that's it. I've never been asked this question before. I'm trying to think, or even be described that way. I think I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the role that I get to play at Microsoft. I'm incredibly grateful that I'm a mother and a wife, and I have friends that are just I have this fantastic network, and so I don't know about humble, but I wake up every day grateful. And I think that I think that is something that I've learned over time, that it's kind of goes back to your mindset. If you're grateful for what you have you versus you wake up in the morning and you're like, oh, I've got 400 meetings today, and I got to get the kids here, and I got to figure out what's for dinner tonight. Like that's a very different mindset than waking up and being like, I get to I have a pretty cool job, and I have these amazing kids that I get to take care of and be part of their lives, and wow, I get to choose, what fabulous thing we're going to eat for dinner tonight. Like, it's just a different way of thinking, and
mindset, right?
So yeah. It's I try really hard to be grateful for what I have in my life.
Yeah, it's really that mindset. Thank you for that answer. I know it's a little bit of an interesting question, right? It's just in terms of what I listen to and how I digest everything that you're saying across all the stories you tell. I had to ask that. Tell me a little bit about your journey, though, right? How do you continue to stay focused? Is there a philosophy or a mission that you continuously apply for you to continue to stay focused?
Well, so I would say two things on that. One, back to Dr. Mike, one of the things that he taught us was, sort of understanding your personal philosophy, which is this notion of like, sort of what is the human being that you want to be? Like what motivates you, if you will. And, again, this was a long time ago, but there, sort of knowing your personal philosophy and what matters to you, I think is something that really helps with being grateful and being centered. And so that I think is a great, is a great thing to, if people know that practice, it's worth taking the time of like really understanding like what matters to you, and what is a personal philosophy that you can hold true. And mine hasn't changed in years and years, and it's something that still guides me. So I think there's that aspect of it. And then the newest thing that I've really, really come to appreciate is this notion of recovery. Because, I would say like I believed in recovery, but it was in big chunks, right? Like I would sort of say like, I'm going to travel, and, I can do all this stuff. Like you might have guessed this. I have I had probably what does my husband call it? He's like, you have a skewed sense of like time almost, because I'm like, I can do everything, and he's like, you can't do everything. You can do some things, but because that's my natural inclination is to want to do everything. What I've learned is that you can't do everything and then wait until you're about to drop to recover. Like recovery comes in small pieces along the way, and that's something I've learned recently with, particularly in the pandemic, of just how much I appreciate. I'll scoot out at lunch and go for a run. I'll have 15 minutes on my calendar and I'll check in with the boys and spend 15 minutes with them on whatever they're playing or, doing schoolwork. And those little things matter in a way that I never appreciated before the pandemic. My calendar used to run from 7 to 7, and I barely had bathroom breaks, and I'd always be eating be like eating my lunch as I'm going into the next meeting. And the little sprints of recovery, just it makes it not seem like a slog. It allows me to feel more optimistic. Actually, stepping out and having lunch, like I said, seeing the kids, going for a run. I actually am more productive because I don't feel so drained.
Thank you for sharing that, right? And just sticking to your journey a little bit, just in terms of how you continue to lead people and make an impact across the organization. You're responsible for an incredibly large amount of people, customers, partners, and an overall business across the globe for one of the largest technology companies in the world. I can only appreciate the amount of thought processes that go through some of the decisions you have to make on a regular basis that impact multiple people. But from a leadership and people impact perspective, leading a group of leaders in a large organization is one thing, but how do you encourage and deploy and adopt and impact thinking, or some of those lessons that you've talked about, from being authentic, being yourself, embracing self-care, ensuring that you're taking a break regularly and you're consistent with that? How do you apply that to the team and ensure that they're consistent with that as well?
It's, I think it's something that's, we're working really hard at. And it's difficult. Like it's hard to say to somebody like, take lunch off, when they've got deadlines and things looming over their head. And so, the best way I have found, and I would say, we're not there yet, but is to model the way. I talk about this. Like I talk about the fact, like, I showed up to the US subsidiary all hands in running clothes. And, I thought, Ashley was going to die, but I was like, well, I had one slot to fit in a run, and, and she always looks, sort of perfect. And she was, beautifully dressed, and I'm like in a ponytail, and I was sort of like, trying to hide the running shirt underneath. But those, like, I hope that people see that and know, like, I'm prioritizing with everything that we have going on. And, to my earlier point, like, I'm scared shitless every day in the jobs that, we have some big things that we've got to do across biz apps. Industry still emerging. Data and AI is, massively important and growing business for us. So we've got a lot to do. But I still prioritize, things that help me recover and stay optimistic and not get drained. And even like in Takeshi's LT meetings, like like Jared now, who runs Modern Work, my peer running Modern Work, he'll go for, in our sessions, like he'll take a session and walk, and he'll show us like on the camera that he's out walking. And, we're all trying to do this. We're all trying to say, like, it can't be a never-ending grind. Like, we have to think about our health and support one another. And, I think each of us modeling that way is the best way to do it. And it's not just me. Like, I want everybody to model the way. We do at my all hands, we'll talk about, what people do to recover. And one of my team members, she knits during meetings to stay focused. So she doesn't lose focus and try and multitask too much. And so celebrating those things and learning from one another is something we're trying to do.
Yeah, look, I love the story about the running clothes, by the way. I get to participate in some of these all hands calls as well, and I get to really appreciate the fun and the authenticity that you bring on a frequent basis to these calls. Back again to the journey, right? Large responsibility. Once again, I can only appreciate the amount of thoughts and analysis that has to go into the decisions that you have to make at your level. If you were to highlight one of the big failures that you've had in your leadership journey? What would that be? And how did you overcome that?
Yeah, this one will never leave me. So I was running the DX team for the US. It was the M&O lead role. I had just made partner, so I had two very young children. So I had a 1 and a 2-year-old, and I had a big team and a big charter, and it was right when we had announced Windows 8. And so the developer division was responsible for getting the applications into the marketplace. And we had this crazy target. It was something like 28,000 applications in less than 8 months that we had to get into the marketplace from the US alone. And, back to my, I signed us up. I was like, we're all in. And, Windows 8 was not a platform that people were gravitating to, developers in particular. And I would say there's two things that I will never forget out of that experience, because one was, I was like, this is our goal. Like, we have to get our goal done. And, we brainstormed and we did some funky things, like, we did contests, and, it was creative of like, what would motivate developers to do this. And it was all in sort of the spirit of like, we got to go get this target done, and we're going to figure out the way to do it. And so that metric was dependent on the US subsidiary making sub of the year. And, by God, we made it. We did 28,001 apps in the marketplace. And we were at MGX in Las Vegas, and Kevin Turner announced the sub of the year, and it was the US. And I'll never forget, the woman I worked for at the time, she was the head of the M&O organization. We all were ecstatic, and we're like, oh my God. And, it was sort of been publicly acknowledged that the reason that we clicked over to winning that was the one metric that we took from bright, bright red to, and nobody thought we could do it, to green. And so I had a team dinner that night, and I walk in and I've got a glass of champagne, and I'm like, oh my God, we did it. And I looked out at a sea of people, and I will never forget this, of people that just were overworked, didn't believe in what we were doing. They were sort of like, it didn't really care. Like, it didn't motivate them that we made sub of the year, because I hadn't brought that team along with. It was just this grind of like, we're going to do it every day. We're going to figure it out. And I'll never forget, I put that glass of champagne down and I thought, I never want to be this kind of leader, because we got the goal. And there was no parade, right? It was me and nobody was with me. And I was like, that is the worst thing I could possibly ever do, which is I jammed a agenda on a team, and they never believed in the mission. They didn't believe in what we were doing, and they weren't motivated by a subsidiary winning an award. They were motivated because they were marketers, and they marketed to developers, and they wanted to inspire developers, not pay them to do applications, which is effectively the contests and things that we did. And so that was, I sort of marked that moment. I was like, I will never, ever do that again. And it's sort of the goal at what cost. That was the lesson I've learned. And the cost was too high. It was the cost of the people and their trust and their belief in the company. And the goal wasn't worth it.
Wow. That's what I have to say to that. It's so easy. And I'm sure you see this more often as well, with leaders to just say, well, we won the thing, let's move forward, right?
Yeah.
But it takes real character to actually recognize what is more important than the result and the metric that was achieved, right? And so, yeah, I have to say, wow, that's an incredible story. Thank you so much for sharing that. I could spend a lot of time talking to you because you have so much of quality and so many cool stories to share. I'm going to ask you my last question, and that's going to be long from now, when the journey is over. What is the type of leader that you want to be remembered for?
It's a great question. And, I hope at the end of this journey, people will look back and know that I was an authentic leader, and one that cared deeply about the teams and the culture that we had. I really want people to come to work and feel motivated by the mission that we have and the work that we do. And I want to be known as somebody that has an impact in the market. and that made a difference for our customers and for our partners and for the market at large.
I have no doubt that you will. I want to say good luck and all the best, and thank you so much. I love learning from you on a regular basis. I love the fact that you took the opportunity to do this. It was a great conversation, so much of quality and some really cool stories that you've shared. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely.